Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So Jiaoqiu is coming, and he's definitely one of the more controversial characters to come out. Kit-wise, a lot of people are extremely underwhelmed, considering he is a 5-star and has a quote-unquote bland kit that makes people very aversive to pulling him. Aside from the various invisible drama that the fandom apparently is very adamant on pulling up for the sake of whatever agenda they serve, and personal reasons that say nothing bad about his kit, I will be addressing specific arguments that I feel as though sums up everything that makes Jiaoqiu a divided support to pull for. So with that out of the way, it's time to answer the question wave, what's with all the doom posting? Let's give a summary as to why Jiaoqiu is supposedly doomed as a specific support. Jiaoqiu is a debuffer that uniquely tackles vulnerability, one of the rarest multipliers in the game. He boosts it to a degree that nobody else does on ultimate damage specifically, and he constantly applies debuffs on his ultimate state. As a support, this is what he has to contend with. While his ultimate vulnerability is incredibly strong, an ultimate base damage dealer will almost always prefer energy buffs like Tingyun, and Tingyun is practically almost free. While his vulnerability is very useful for Super Break, Ruanmei dominates that field and pure DOT too. While his vulnerability can go multi-DPS enabling, Robin will always be the better pick, especially with follow-ups. So, case closed, right? Jiaoqiu is bad because he's specific. Not exactly. Stopping here would be a bit disingenuous. Ruanmei, Tingyun, and Robin also have similar arguments as to why they don't prefer to be used in certain teams. Robin for Super Break could work, but it isn't as good. Ruanmei with energy hypercarries isn't necessarily that good either, and Tingyun can't battery Acheron. Jiaoqiu is by far the best limited Acheron support. We'll go through his perks later as to why this is true, but for the argument at hand, even if Jiaoqiu isn't the best Acheron support, you have to keep in mind that every other support like we listed earlier isn't as universal as you may perceive due to the concept of stat lines and DPS needs. Viability isn't just an on and off switch, there's degrees of viability, and Jiaoqiu's near unconditional enabling will always be at a decent enough level of viability to function, much like the other 5-star supports that are considered meta. Being specific isn't a make or break by itself. Firefly legitimately has only one team, and look at every meta-analysis about her. Even so, Jiaoqiu is far from the most specific character with a support role, and is actually a bit more of a generalist than Harmony's in functionality, due to how his debuff tackles a very rare multiplier. The next argument is Jiaoqiu isn't that big of an upgrade. Just a while ago, I said that Jiaoqiu was the best Acheron support. He is possibly one of the best examples of the theory of comfort versus potential, and I'll explain why. Jiaoqiu is the best not because of his numbers, but because he makes things so much more easier and consistent. Guinaifen may have similar vulnerability at Eidolon 6, but she is much harder to build them up when Jiaoqiu is very fast and doesn't suffer in AoE and multi-wave content. While you can use strengths to do the same thing as Jiaoqiu's debuff, it is beholden to RNG and a specific path, as if Acheron needed more path restrictions on her belt, by the way. In Pure Fiction, Black Swan provides more self-damage, but without the proper damage thresholds, her Arcana might not be strong enough to dent the enemy into the perfect HP, and she doesn't really have enough defense down to stack on the enemy to overtake Jiaoqiu. Nihility itself is very sketchy inside PF, especially supports who rely on their ult for debuff application, which is practically all of them. Jiaoqiu doesn't have this problem, and in practice can overtake every Nihility support in PF scenarios due to his mechanic. These are upgrades that are impossible to calculate and truly relies on practice to show how big of an upgrade it is. While you might scoff at the idea that ease of play is even a consideration in meta-analyses, plenty of characters have gotten the meta status because of it. Jingliu and Blade were easy to play and had wider selection of supports back in the day that made them meta over higher scaling characters that did more work. Even considering the rarity, Pela can still have grounds to be used over Silverwolf because she's much easier to play. Ease of play is a very important factor, especially when the team you're playing is already restricted enough as is, or if you're a person not wanting to bother with min-maxing for good results. So case closed, the Doom posters are wrong. Jiaoqiu is a good pull since he's the best specific Acheron piece due to sheer comfort, and he's not really specific, right? Well, let's get into arguments of why Jiaoqiu is a skip that are completely valid, by the way. Acheron teams don't need Jiaoqiu. Acheron teams are one of the most unique teams in the sense that they have a very high floor, and many of the options to boost it outside of Acheron herself are pretty inexpensive. This is a different case from Super Break wanting a Ron May, since Super Break without her suffers from a lot of flaws that can't be covered by anything else, notably weakness break extension and literally just breaking the enemy 1.5 times faster. Similarly with Robin, follow-up attacks at a baseline isn't as strong, but has a high curve with more investment into expensive units and fuel for your crit relics. Jiaoqiu is helping out a team that is undeniably strong at a baseline, and while he is an ease-of-use pick, the fact that good enough alternatives exist like Trents or Gwynaifen makes it so that many people are content without him considering the price. I also want to remind everyone watching that DOT-centric PFs can get absolutely miserable. There isn't any indication that DOT will be the next meta though, so I won't be considering it much for this review at all. Speaking of the future, let's talk about possibly the biggest reason why Jiaoqiu is being skipped. The meta is shifting. The current meta is practically on the Titanic, about to hit the iceberg known as follow-up, and the water is already feeling really cold. Jiaoqiu inevitably is going to be hurt by this because his niche does not fit what the devs are selling in the new meta archetype. While the number differences of follow-up attack and Acheron teams aren't that big on paper, the biases of blessings definitely will sway people to ditch out-of-bias teams, like Apocalyptic Shadow's Fat Elemental Resists and Pure Fiction's Blessings. If simply using the wanted element is a 60% damage increase, and the blessings can get you 10k points by itself, then it's gonna be an obvious problem if you don't want to build the answer. Acheron teams are no exception to this, and people will be looking to the shiny new toy the devs are waving over their face whether they like it or not. Following what the game is blatantly telling you to go for has had a pretty high success rate. That's why meta slaves are so successful, even though they don't really learn that much about anything. We can wrap up the points about skipping into one simple dilemma. Horizontal investment is important. HSR as a game is leaned towards building a lot of characters, using those characters to make a lot of teams, then arrange the teams to abuse blessings and mechanics that require specific niches in endgame content. It can range to be somewhat useful blessings with MOC, or downright miserable like Apocalyptic Shadow. If you have a very strong team already that can clear without any issues in endgame, what more can investing vertically really do? Sure, you may get more damage out of the one team you fancy so much, but when the blessings make them feel awful to play, then you're gonna have an egg thrown on your face. The alternative choice of vertical investment is to build another team archetype and have it ready. The next time endgame content that favors that archetype comes up, you can get all the blessings and clear easily. Even if a specific team can get a 15 to 30% upgrade on pulling someone, blessings more often than not can make up for that upgrade in larger amounts. Like we discussed, we are in a follow-up meta. It's very much high time to start investing on follow-up units instead of upgrading units that can't take advantage of endgame bias. It's not impossible to go against the path of least resistance, by the way, but there's an undeniable bias. That's just how every gacha game works. I've heard a lot of comparisons that all paint a picture of how Jiaoqiu is severely underrated. But with all the problems I see, the closest comparison, a very generous one, is Sparkle. Sparkle was a big hyper-carry DPS increase with added comfort, but inevitably had to suffer from her team archetype not being the hottest thing to run, since they were trying to develop double DPS archetypes with Runmei and Robin. While many could not deny Sparkle's power and was still useful clearly, her teams were not the center of the universe, and inevitably she was less popular than what she could have been. Jiaoqiu suffers from a similar case, but there's something to be said that we're comparing Jing Yuan without Sparkle to Acheron without Jiaoqiu. It's not really a fair comparison, is it? But of course, with the power of money giving you a 400% damage boost, then anything is clearable. So my advice is to spend money. I'm joking, please don't spend money. But that's why Jiaoqiu is unpopular kit-wise. He's a case study of how sometimes limited supports can sometimes not be as popular as others or conceived as low value simply because of dev biases and design flaws. Anyway, that's all for your bi-weekly video. I'm going to have a different video later in the week, and a lot of you guys aren't subscribed. Join my membership. I'm doing this out of order. Do the algo stuff, all of them, comments, like, subscribe, whatever that. I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.